Lots of news to talk about today, but how about let's just start out with something positive, a free game. If you haven't played or bought Hogwarts Legacy yet, you can get it for free on the Epic Game Store. So for those of you not allergic to the Epic Game Store, free game. Pretty cool. This is not sponsored anyway, just throwing the word out there. Now, I want to start clearing up something I've been seeing in comment sections about AMD's new machine learning-based frame generation, which is the main new thing we got out of their Redstone update, where I think that a lot of people either didn't actually watch the hardware unboxed video or didn't understand it correctly when I'm reading comments about the frame pacing issues that are discussed in this video. The video itself is extremely clear what is happening, but the comments I'm seeing do not seem to be understanding it correctly. So I've been seeing a ton of people saying that the machine learning based version of AMD's frame generation that was introduced as part of FSR Redstone has worse frame pacing, or the frame pacing is broken compared to the previous version, and that is not what was claimed in this video. This video is claiming that the frame pacing issues that were already present with the previous version of AMD's frame generation have not improved, meaning they are still present, but it is the same frame pacing situation that we already had with AMD's frame generation. So I'm not trying to excuse the frame pacing issues. I just want to make sure people have the correct information here. It is not that machine learning based frame generation has worse frame pacing than the previous version. It's that the previous version already had frame pacing issues and this hasn't fixed it. Now, why would people have thought that it would maybe fix it? Because this is an RDNA 4 exclusive feature, which, has cons for sure for people who wanted this feature on older GPUs, could potentially have some pros in that RDNA 4, unlike previous RDNA generations, do have hardware flip queue support, which can be used to offload video frame scheduling to the GPU, so for better frame pacing controlled on the GPU. For NVIDIA, when they released the 5000 series and their multi-frame generation support, one of the things that they discussed as a change compared to their previous frame generations was using hardware flip metering for the frame pacing. And I think it's implied that that's one of the reasons they're not giving multi-frame generation to the previous GPU generations. Whether or not that's actually true or needed or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, that's something that NVIDIA's been doing with its 5000 series with their frame generation. Now, AMD's RDNA 4 does have hardware flip queue support, according to AMD. So now that we kind of run into a situation where it's unclear, does that mean that their new machine learning-based frame generation doesn't use the hardware flip queue support? Or does it mean that they're using it, but it just didn't solve the frame pacing issues with their frame generation? I also want to make sure everybody fully understands the frame pacing situation, because what's been my experience with it in my testing, and Tim also said the same thing in his video here, is that in some games and honestly, what I've seen for me is sometimes even in the same game, but in different situations, the frame pacing seems to be working well. The motion fluidity looks good, but then in other games or even at other times in the same game, sometimes it seems like the frame pacing is a bit off. Now, this is a really big deal for frame generation, because the whole point of the feature is you're not actually getting more performance. The only thing it's giving you is better motion fluidity. So if the motion fluidity isn't being increased, or at least not as well as it could be, that is a pretty major flaw with frame generation. So anyway, that's where it currently stands. So NVIDIA still definitely has better frame pacing in their frame generation. The machine learning version of AMD's frame generation did improve the image quality of their frame generation, but not the frame pacing. And again, like I said, maybe there's still room for improvement with this hardware flip queue support for RDNA 4. If that's not already being relied upon, we'll have to see. Now, another update that's come out since then is I had wondered if Optiscaler would start to allow this version of Frame Gen to be added into games that didn't support it. Because one of my biggest criticisms of the machine learning-based frame generation in my video was the game support list. Unlike the FSR4 upscaling, where the driver override feature only requires FSR 3.1 to be integrated into a game in order to do the upgrade to FSR4 upscaling, which is now no longer FSR4. It is machine learning upscaling, FSR. Anyway, but the frame generation requires a newer version, 3.1.4, and far fewer games have that. So, for example, Monster Hunter Wilds, I believe, has 3.1.2. Not 3.1.4. So it doesn't have the frame generation machine learning version upgrade available. But I saw this post on the Radiance subreddit where somebody has it up and running through Optiscaler. Now, I was a bit confused because I hadn't seen an Optiscaler update on the GitHub that allowed for this. But digging through this, they mention that this version is available through the Optiscaler Discord server. It is free, though. So apparently that's how you can get this. Now, I haven't tested this out yet. I'll probably wait until the link's available on the actual GitHub. But this is showing that it looks like you will be able to use Optiscaler to get the ML Frame Gen into games that don't have FSR 3.1.4 natively. So that's a good thing. Now, hopefully more games will start to get it because AMD did launch the FSR SDK 2.1.0, which does allow for the integration of these features. Now, there has been a big question about FSR Radiance caching, and when will we actually see a game with that? Because this is one of the other big features of FSR Redstone that didn't actually come out with the December 10th launch date. Again, it launched one of the features, the ML Frame Gen feature at least, and then made the FSR Radiance caching available to game developers. Now, in the launch materials, there is a showcase of FSR Radiance caching working in Warhammer 40k Darktide. So there was some speculation that this would be available soon in this game, or this would be the first game with it available. But it has been clarified that FSR Radiance caching requires further development and optimization and is not currently planned for release in Darktide. And the game developers have stated that themselves. Again, all my sources will be linked in the video description. Now, speaking of games getting FSR upgrades, though, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which just absolutely dominated the Game Awards, including winning Game of the Year, has dropped an update for the game as a thank you for winning the awards. And as part of that update, they have added FSR 4 support, or I guess the FSR formerly known as FSR 4, although when it's integrated directly into a game, the game menus still sometimes call it FSR 4, but the official AMD branding no longer has numbers, so AMD FSR Super Resolution parentheses ML. And anyway, I consider doing a whole video about, like, was it a mistake for AMD to kill the branding for FSR 4? Because of all the big AMD software features that have got generally a positive reaction, FSR 4 has got a lot of really good coverage. So to me, it seems like an absolute mistake to kill off the FSR 4 branding when it actually had a bunch of positive press. So it's like people know what this is. They know it's good. You can search FSR 4 and get lots of positive reviews. And let's no longer call it FSR 4. Oh my goodness. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand marketing, but to me, that seems like a marketing blunder. But anyway, I haven't been able to test this out myself yet. Maybe it would be interesting. I'm not sure if it would be worth a whole video, but Clair Obscur Expedition 33 does now have FSR 4 support. Now, speaking of game performance and testing stuff related to the Game Awards, at the Game Awards, it was announced that Pragmata would be getting a PC demo available as of the Game Awards. Now, I haven't had a chance to check it out yet, but we are at least starting to get some people checking it out and saying it runs like a dream. Now, this is running on Capcom's RE engine, which has had some pretty terrible performance games like Monster Hunter Wilds and Dragon's Dogma 2, however, has also had games that run beautifully, and it really seems to be the scale of the game. The engine doesn't seem well suited to large open worlds, but does seem very well suited to smaller scale experiences. And it certainly seems like, from what we know so far, that Pragmata is more of the type of game where this is well suited. So maybe I'll have some time to do a video specifically just testing out Pragmata's PC demo, see what I think. But initial coverage is looking quite positive for the PC performance of this game. Now, another big thing coming out of the Game Awards was the discussion of Star Wars: Fate of the Old Republic, which is being led by Casey Hudson, who directed Knights of the Old Republic, one of my favorite games of all time. Absolutely loved that game growing up. Huge, like when you have memories of games that really stand out for you, that's one of the big ones for me. Now, he also directed Anthem, so make of that what you will, and his latest studio was working on a game that I think the studio ended up having to shut down due to lack of funding, and whatever they were working on didn't ever get a release. So there's been some questions about, first of all, will this game actually happen? Will it be good? And even if it does come out, will we get it, before 2030? Like, how long will this take? And that was the speculation being posted about it. Now, Casey Hudson himself has actually now replied, "Don't worry about the not till 2030 rumors. Game will be out before then. I'm not getting any younger." Now, just because he claims that's the case doesn't mean that will actually be the case, and games often have release targets that end up slipping and they get delayed, etc. But that's at least where we're at with that right now. Now, one of the games that some people expected to see announced at the Game Awards, but we didn't, was Half-Life 3. Now, what's potentially going on with that? We're seeing people who claim to have insider sources on this. I found this at WCCF Tech, but they are claiming, their source here is the latest episode of the Insider Gaming Weekly podcast, where journalist Mike Straw provided an update on the Half-Life 3 situation. Again, he claims to have sources there. And basically, he's saying that it's supposed to be a launch game for the Steam machine, but right now Valve is kind of being hit by the RAM price situation, which is potentially going to cause issues for the Steam machine, at least hitting price targets that they want. But anyway, the current claim, at least from these insider sources, grain of salt, etc., whatever, is that Half-Life 3 is planned as a Steam machine launch game. Now, does that mean that somehow something will go wrong and now we just don't get a Steam machine? Because Half-Life 3 can't ever actually release, can it? That would, I don't even know what that would mean. Like it's just been a meme of never existing for so long. I don't even know how to process that. Now, in other game performance-related news, there is a bunch of performance improvements promised for Monster Hunter Wilds on December 16th. Now, when I recently just tested out Borderlands 4 performance patch and noted some real improvements, and then I saw myself get misquoted on Reddit a whole bunch, claiming anyway, sorry. A lot of the performance improvements in Borderlands 4 were from 8GB VRAM GPUs performing better. There are also, but smaller, performance improvements for other GPUs at other settings. But I saw some Reddit posts where they take one screenshot from my video, claim Borderlands 4 performance boosted 70% by this patch. It's like, did you watch the video? That's because the VRAM got under control on the 8GB card, but cards that had enough VRAM did not get a 70% performance boost, but whatever. Anyway, in my testing of that video, got sidetracked here, a lot of comments are asking me to do the same thing for Monster Hunter Wilds when this big performance update drops. Now, one thing that could complicate that is to measure the performance improvements, you have to have a an original test before the performance improvements drops to then compare directly to after the performance improvements drops. With Borderlands 4, I had already done a bunch of repeatable benchmark runs at a variety of graphic settings on the launch version of the game, which I could then directly compare to the patched version of the game to get launch versus patch performance numbers. In Monster Hunter Wilds, when the game launched, it launched with a benchmark tool, which I used for my benchmarking of the game at its launch. However, it does not appear to be the case that the benchmark tool is getting updated when the actual main game gets updated. So my day one performance numbers using that benchmark tool are not going to be then comparable to something I can test in the game after it gets these performance improvements, unless the benchmark tool also gets these performance improvements, which hasn't seemed to have been the case from what I've noticed in the other in other updates for the game. So what I could potentially do is test the game out now prior to this update, and then I can test it after the update, and then I can compare those two things. But I don't think I'm going to be able to do a launch versus update test the way I did for Borderlands 4. So in other words, if there has been any performance improvements from launch till now, I can't measure that, but I could measure now versus after the patch next week. So if I'm going to cover this, I think that would be how I would have to do it, because like I said, my launch date coverage was mostly for convenience reasons using the built-in benchmark tool that they provided, so I don't have footage of the original performance numbers. Hopefully that makes sense for those comparisons. So it's not that I can't do comparisons, just it can't be quite the way I did it for Borderlands 4. Unless they end up updating the benchmark tool, which I doubt they will. Anyway, now let's talk about Intel's Battlemage Arc B770. Are we actually getting it? Now, we're starting to see more evidence that it might be actually coming. So we had somebody post on Twitter with the B770, Panther Lake and Nova Lake on the horizon. There's lots to get hyped about in the future as well. And Intel Gaming replied with the statement, 100%, we're thrilled to hear that you're pumped about the B770, Panther Lake, and Nova Lake. The future of gaming and performance is looking seriously exciting. Notice that they're replying about the B770, and there's no, they're not denying that the B770 will be a thing. They're listing it and then saying the future of gaming. In other words, is this implying that the B770 is indeed actually coming? Or is this like a chatbot that's just taking what he said and saying, yes, I agree? So in other words, does this mean the B770 is really coming? Maybe. And maybe there's a real human who's making these decisions, and maybe that human actually knows anything about the B770. Or maybe it's a human who does marketing and doesn't know anything about the B770. Or like I said, maybe it's a chatbot making replies. You don't know about these things, okay? Now, that being said, there is other evidence that the B770 may indeed actually be coming, because we have been seeing, and I've reported on this previously already, but I'll bring it back up now, that shipping manifests have shown a part that very well could be a B770 from Intel. So again, we don't know for sure if this would actually be a gaming product or anything like that, but maybe. So B770, still a possibility. Now, in other news, we have Microsoft kind of seeming to, now I shouldn't say that they're scared of how much people are hating Windows 11 and talking about moving to Linux, because realistically, that's a very small actual percentage of the overall market. But if you're watching my tech channel, there's a good chance you watch other ones as well. And there's just been a general sentiment on so many PC gaming tech related comment sections, the actual content creators themselves, etc., expressing a general frustration with Windows 11, just because it's the newest version of Windows, and just the experience of using it, also for gaming, all sorts of problems. And so, it seems to be the most interest there's ever been in abandoning Windows if there was a good alternative. And meanwhile, you've got Valve over there with SteamOS trying to really push the gaming experience on Linux up to something that's the best it's ever been, even if it's still not perfect. So we now have Microsoft promising more performant Windows 11 optimized for gaming, saying we're committed to making Windows the best place to play, and we will continue refining system behaviors that matter most to gaming. Background workload management, power and scheduling improvements, graphics stack optimizations, and updated drivers. And again, they've made recent progress on the Xbox full screen experience, which is primarily designed around handheld systems right now, especially systems that would benefit from freeing up any little bits of RAM that could be available, things like that. So I'm just really hoping that Microsoft really does look at improving the end user experience of Windows 11. I'm going to be honest, the biggest issue for me is just that it seems like every time there's some big update installed, it takes me back through the initial Windows onboarding process, which is entirely just trying to advertise, hey, you could subscribe to, Microsoft 365 or whatever the heck it's called. And if you don't click the correct, skip this or don't do that or whatever button, it's trying to get you to agree to use their recommended browser. In other words, let's switch you over to Edge, even though that's what you didn't want. So if you click through those menus too fast. Anyway, so my oldest daughter's getting to a point where I'm trying to teach her how to use a PC, and I've even got a few games on there for her and other productivity programs and stuff. But when she starts up the PC, sometimes that pops up and she's like, I'm scared, I don't know what to click. I don't want to click the wrong thing. And I get it. Anyway, it's just there's so many things to complain about. But anyway, I'm hoping that they start to improve the experience. And they seem to at least be promising that. Now, should we talk about the latest on the RAM crisis? So, we have headlines like memory shortages are actually so terrible that Samsung is shifting HBM production towards DDR5 to ensure that it gets maximized profits. So this is an interesting flip where a lot of the doom and gloom around the DDR5 situation has been the fact that manufacturers like SK Hynix and Samsung, etc., had been seeming to indicate that they were focused on AI data centers. They were not thinking about ramping up production for gaming memory. We even had Micron ending their own crucial consumer-facing memory business. Again, with the explicit stated reason to focus on AI data center, where there's more growth and profitability. So interestingly, though, the price of DDR5 has gotten so high that Samsung is now talking about shifting its resources away from HBM production towards DDR5. Now, there's a little more to it than that, because my understanding is that Samsung, compared to other memory manufacturers like SK Hynix, I believe actually struggle more with their HBM production. So with the other ones doubling down on HBM production and Samsung not being quite as good at HBM production from my end, again, I'm more focused on the PC gaming side of the tech stuff, but that's my general understanding of the situation. It seems like that might be part of why Samsung specifically is more interested in going back toward DDR5 production. But to be clear, not all DDR5 production is for gaming PCs, right? There's still uses for it in, data centers and et cetera. So this doesn't necessarily mean we're solving the problem, but at least if there's, more DDR5 supply, and we're in a supply-demand crunch, then this certainly doesn't sound like bad news. Now, that being said, SK Hynix, in some internal documents, which, again, being leaked information, you always have to take with a grain of salt on the credibility of this, but in leaked claims, which seem official but could possibly not be, SK Hynix seems to be warning that DRAM supply growth will lag demand through 2028. Again, looking at leaked screenshots of what are apparently internal information being spread within the company, saying excluding HBM and SOCAM, supply bit growth for commodity DRAM is projected to be constrained through 2028. While supplier inventories are being depleted to minimum levels, production capacity is expected to see limited growth compared to previous upturns. So again, what they're saying there with that second bullet point is they're not projecting a bunch more production of commodity DRAM because, again, these companies are stating that they don't want to do the boom and bust cycles where they invest a bunch into production and then whatever the current bubble is kind of pops and then they're left holding the bag for all that money. Again, Samsung here, I don't think, when they're talking about this shift from HBM production towards DDR5, I don't think they're talking about like major new capital investments. It's like shifting production capacities that are already in place from HBM towards DDR5, rather than opening up whole new factories producing DDR5 on top of everything else, right? So that's kind of the difference in that situation. Now, apparently the RAM situation is getting so bad that there's rumblings within the smartphone industry that they could be reintroducing 4GB RAM devices, and flagships had been shifting over towards 16GB of memory, and that trend could be slowing because, again, of the amount of cost that introduces into the bill of materials on all of this. And we have Dell's computer prices are reported to rise for corporate clients. Here's what to expect and what it's telling sales staff. This is from Business Insider. Now, if you crawl through this, you get some specific numbers, but I noticed the WCCF Tech summary of the article has a nicer bullet point of some of the specific dollar values. Again, all my sources will be posted in the video description. Saying $130 to $230 increase for Dell Pro and Pro Max notebooks and desktops configured with 32GB of memory, a $520 to $765 increase for systems configured with 128GB of memory, $55 to $135 increase for configurations with a 1TB SSD, $150 increase for Dell Pro 55 plus 4K monitor. And I'm a little confused. I don't know this monitor specifically, but does this monitor use RAM? Like a significant amount of it? That seems odd. I don't know. Anyway, $66 increase for AI laptops equipped with an NVIDIA RTX Pro 500 Blackwell GPU, 6GB. $530 increase for AI laptops equipped with an NVIDIA RTX Pro 500 Blackwell GPU, 24GB. So we're getting some hard numbers on what sorts of price increases to expect, at least from Dell. But if Dell's doing this, you would expect the other big PC manufacturers to be doing similar things. So that's where we're at right now, guys. So today we did have some good news, some free games, some little highlights here. We got FSR 4 and Clair Obscur, but we're certainly in some dark times for the PC pricing at least as well. But that's what I've got for you guys today. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, found it useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.